A very good evening to you. Welcome to another NewsMakerLive broadcast right here on DBS television. With me, Timothy Polio. We conclude at 10 o'clock this evening. During the course of the broadcast, we'll be focusing on an issue which continues to dominate the news and also continues to impact the lives of a majority of people in St. Lucia. Maybe not directly per se, but indirectly as well. I'm talking about the crime situation and in particular the homicide rate. So far for this year, we've recorded some 29 homicides. Most of those people would be males. And we've been speaking about this on the various talk shows in St. Lucia. But it's time certainly for us, I'm sure you'll agree, to come up with some concrete plans, some recommendations as to the way forward, because obviously we cannot continue to be hamstrung by this particular situation. My guest this evening, I believe, is in a position to address that issue, and she is a human rights advocate, and she's also a lecturer at the University of the West Indies, and she also dabbled in politics in 2011, contesting unsuccessfully the Castries Central seat on an LPM ticket. Yes. Welcome to the broadcast, Felicia Brown.
Thank you. Good morning. Good evening. Sorry.
Right. Before I even venture to ask any specific question, let me make reference to the latest homicide which occurred yesterday. A 39-year-old succumbed to injuries sustained earlier this month. And it really pains you to see this story of his girlfriend and the mother of his 10-month-old baby speaking, and certainly in a state of grief. We have a report from DBS's Sheffield Gillard. This report was filed this evening during the DBS News World.
Silka Leo, the girlfriend of Grand Riviere shooting victim Kimuel Alexander, says she does not know what could have led the father of a 10-month-old son coming to such a violent end. 43-year-old Kimuel Alexander received multiple gunshots near his home in Grand Riviere on June 23rd during a drive-by shooting. He was transported to the Victoria Hospital but succumbed to his injuries on Tuesday evening. Leo is joining calls for an end to the violence.
I want everybody to just start loving each other and pray, put God first, and love their families, friends, appreciate people, put the guns away.
The 20-year-old mother shared a Grand Riviere home with Alexander for almost a year, and since he is gone, she says things will be difficult for her and her son since Alexander was the one who took care of them.
It's not easy, Dad, because I'm so accustomed of him around me. So it's really hurting me.
And now that you're a single parent, how is that going to affect you and the baby?
A lot. I don't know where to start.
Leo describes her boyfriend as a fun, loving person who was strong, always happy, good to be around, and who loved his 5 children. No arrests have been made, but police are continuing their investigations. For the DBS News World, I am Sheffield Gillard.
Thank you very much, Sheffield, for this report. Once again, it was filed this evening during the DBS News World. Let me turn my attention again to you, Ms. Brown. What say you? Just listen to this report and hearing the voice of this grief-stricken mother and, of course, a young lady who lost a boyfriend.
Yes,
in such tragic circumstances.
First of all, I'd like to extend condolences to the families. In times, when such times, it's such a tragedy that families go through this traumatic experiences. And as we can see, it's young women and young men that we're dealing with. Most of those young persons will not get the kind of counseling that is necessary. And it's very important because these are tragic situations for those young persons, and they do not get the kinds of counseling that is necessary. And so in cases like that, those kinds of incidences, we need to have the social services responsible to help those young families. families. When we see those kinds of young persons engaging or having those kinds of experiences as young people, it does send some signal of what are the long-term effects, not only on the mother, but on the baby, on the child. How is it going to affect him when he's growing up as well? So when we see those types of violent crime, we as a society have to realize that it is time that we start implementing policies. It is time that we start implementing services to help those victims of crimes, and particularly the living families as well of the deceased.
Are we seized of those issues, the ramifications, the implications of not doing anything in terms of the counseling?
There will always have implications. We're human beings, and the psychological effect of those cases will always have some impact on us. It may desensitize us to what is actually happening within our society. It may also allow us, and as we saw, we're dealing with young men, and she has a young son. How does that impact on him? 10 years down the line, how does it impact on his life? How does it impact on the other children's lives? And so as a society, we need to start looking at that. Counseling does play a part within our societies. It does provide the rehabilitation for those individuals. And as much as possible, when we look at violence, violence in itself is something that impacts on our psyche. It may not affect us directly because we may not be involved in the environment, but even as a viewer, how does it affect you? Every time you turn on the television, it's a violent crime. We see the bodies, we see the grieving family. How does it affect us as a society? That must have an impact on our psyche. It must have an impact on our psychological balances as well. So we need to look at those factors as well.
So therefore, do you think that we are taking so many things for granted? We just go through the motion, we watch those things on television,
yes, because
we report on
yes,
it,
yes.
we lament over
because
a
it doesn't
particular
affect
period, and we
us.
just move on.
Yes, because it's not directly.
Or do we really move on?
Until the next event happens. Mm-hmm. And that's what usually happens as individuals. We see those crimes happen, it affects us, we look at it, and we move on. And then it happens again. But something else that we need to look at, the fact is that if it's not directly affected to us, if it's not our family members, if it's not our friends, then we can immediately dismiss it. Oh yes, another shooting down the road, or another person died. But when it happens within our communities, when it happens to our families, then we see the direct impact that it has on our lives. And so yes, there will be the argument that crime will always exist. But there's a different type of crime that is existing right now in our societies. Too many of our young males, our younger generations are being killed, are losing their lives through that type of violence. So we need to look at those kinds of situations.
Why do you think that we're facing this problem right now, especially with our males?
The values. The moral values, the social values that we place in our societies. What do we believe our young men, what kinds of values that we place for them, not only in terms of their livelihoods, but as an individual. How do you value your life? How do you see yourself? How do you see yourself in the next 5 years? What are your goals? What are your dreams? And if for a young man, 25 years old is his goal, and that's something else that we need to look at as well. When we look at the statistics, the majority of young males that are incarcerated, the majority of young males that are dying through those rituals are hardly 30. Mm-hmm. And that tells us something about our society as well. When we have those kinds of incidences happening, when we have those kinds of experiences happening within our society, what are some of the impacts that it have on us as individuals, us as citizens? And what can we do to change that for them? Because if we have young boys growing up and he knows that his life can be cut short by the time he's 30 years old, then what does it say? The long-term consequences is very important. Because we always make the statement that the youth, our future. But our future dying out. They're dying out. Their fathers that are dying, the young man that passed away, he's a father of 5. Their parents. And so these are some of the concerns that we have to look at, that these young men, they have lives. They're not only victims of crimes, but they're human beings as well. They have goals, they have aspirations as well. And so we have to holistically look at those individuals. We have to look at those kids we call, those children that we look in terms of at-risk kids and at-risk youth, and see how we can intervene, provide the intervention services for them so that it will not end up the places that the consequences will not be as detrimental as it is right now.
But we need to start somewhere. Where do we start? Do you think we should start one particular place, or do you think that we almost must have somebody who is a coach and who must guide the team, guide the individuals, so that they can coalesce into a team,
Yes.
so that they can be successful?
But what we're also saying is that we're excluding our adult males in societies. Where are our adult males? Where are the fathers within our society? Where are the mothers? We keep blaming women when children do things, when young boys, we see the mothers on television all the time. He was my son. But where are the fathers? Where are the uncles? Where are the other members of the family or the members of the community that should be there to help develop that child? Because children do not grow on their own. As a family, as a society, as a village, we are the ones who have to groom those children to become who they are.
But when, for example, the reality in most homes is that they're headed by single parents.
Yes.
By a female most times.
Yes.
So therefore, you're saying that a family should consist of a mother and father, extended family, etc., when that is not the case?
It does not, a family does not, families have different facets. It can be a mother, grandmother, it could be a neighbor. And so family has changed so much over the years. We can't always see it has to be a mother and a father. It could be a mother, it could be a father, it could be an aunt, it could be an uncle. But what I'm saying is that society, communities have become so disengaged in the upbringing of children. And so we see children on the streets, we see them in the communities. Do we speak to them? Do we find out how their day is going? Do we want to find out what are their dreams? And so dismissing children at an early age, it's the mother's role and it's the father's role, that's not my business. The children, I saw them misbehaving on the street, but you know that child. So it's what we'd call a collective morality, a collective responsibility, because when those same children that you ignored become the adults or they become the teenagers, at that point, what can you say to them? When you saw them when they were 5 and 6 and you did not discipline them, you did not speak to them, do you expect that to happen when they're adults?
But do we run the risk of putting ourselves in harm's way if, for example, at the age of 5 and 6, we try to correct those children? Their parents, do they understand that the extended family, meaning members of the society, they have a role as well?
Yes, I think that we have the delusion term that I would like to use. Since when? Since when have we forgotten what community togetherness is? Since when we have forgotten that children are not only ours, but the community, it is part of the community. And so we as a society, we have to remember that where did we stop becoming community members? What stopped or what created that? Are we trying to emulate other types of societies? We're very small and tight-knit societies. Most of our communities are family-based. And so we as a society have to do some deeper reflection to realize where did we cut or break the connection between family and children, between community and children.
But do you think we'll learn that on our own? Because we keep saying we. And somebody needs to take the lead on that particular issue if there's going to be any kind of rectification.
Yes.
And we'll continue to say we for an extended lifetime, for an extended period without any kind of success. Don't you agree?
Yes, I do agree, but we is better than saying I. And individualism is one of the biggest concerns that we'd have. It's one of the reasons why people tend not to think about others, because we're thinking about I. So the we is very important, and the we is taught. It's something that is taught, it's something that is nurtured within the family. As once you have children, you start nurturing, looking after each other, caring for each other, having compassion. So it's really about developing that kind of characteristic, or what we call civil responsibility, something we need to teach in schools, something we need to teach as early as kindergarten, so that children learn those things. They learn about being part of a community. Because as human beings, we always want to be part of a group. We always want to be part of something to keep us collectively together. But if you don't have that, and I believe this is what is happening, a lot of young persons are looking for that collective group, which is detrimental to them. And what we were discussing, which would be the gang-related activities. because a gang is really like a family. But what type of family? And what it's actually creating, it's a detriment to those individuals. And so these are some of the concerns that you'd want to look at as social activists, as policymakers as well.
But I still must make reference to this, that the fact that it seems that we appear lost, we appear rudderless when it comes to those issues, because I do not believe that the way we're talking about the various interest groups on their own will act in unison.
Yes.
And we need to start somewhere.
We will start when we begin to realize the long-term consequences. I was speaking with someone today, and I told them when I was growing up in St. Lucia, we never had drive-by shootings. If we heard about that, it's probably on television, we're watching those kinds of things happening. But it's happening in our societies now. Our children are becoming exposed to that kinds of behaviors and experiences. And so when you hear about drive-by shootings, would people or children, would you want your daughter or your son to be by this, just being playing around? No. So these kinds of concerns, it will get there. We'll be forced to create that we. When we realize that if we don't, it will be a detriment to our survival. And I think that's what's going to happen in the end.
So it's taken a very long time, because we are at the stage where, for example, the 6th month of this year, 29 homicides.
Yes.
Okay. There have been instances, I think we've been a little over 50 at least one particular year.
Yes.
If it continues, don't you think that we run the risk of having a lot more people being killed, and the we that you're making reference to still being totally oblivious to the magnitude, the gravity of the problem, and we again being the kind of people lackadaisical and also selfish, not bent, not intent on doing anything to rectify.
But I don't...
Because don't you think we appear lost sometimes, not knowing what to do, how to tackle the problem? We lament, we quarrel, we complain, we feel the pain, but we always throw our hands in there and say, what can we do? Leave everything to God. Well,
there's nothing wrong in leaving it to the higher calling, and as human beings we would do that. If we don't see the physical aspect working, we would call into the spiritual elements. But what is very important is that we have to create the alternatives. We need the alternative situations. We need the alternatives in terms of, we see a lot of young persons, and I don't know if you recognize that, but this generation has a lot more younger persons than when I was growing up. And so we see that their lives are different, the cultures are different. Even in societies, you may have subcultures as well. They have a greater access to information. And so we as a society have to recognize that the youth have their role in society. We cannot dismiss them. Because the majority of what we're discussing right now is because we've dismissed their voice. So the youth must have their voice. They must have a platform where they can speak on those issues that affect them. We find even in as low as primary school, those issues affect them. I have nieces, and I speak with them sometimes, and they tell me what they hear about the gun violence. And I ask them, how does it affect you? They're afraid. They're fearful. And like I said, these are incidences that we need to reflect. It may not happen, and for as a resident of Mondido, Black Stars, where I grew up, and we're seeing that most of the crime is mostly centered within that area. How do we look for solutions? The solutions will have to come from the citizens, the community members. What can we do to change that? Because it's affecting us. Though we may say that, okay, well, these persons not related to us, but it will affect us at some point.
But do you think those people are equipped to deal with the issues?
We will make them. We'd have to. We'll have to educate them. Education is very important. Education doesn't only mean the academics, but it also means your social responsibility as well. It's good that sometimes when I'm walking in town, I'm observing, and I would see older men talking to younger men, okay, Gassa, you shouldn't have done that and stuff. It's good when we do that. It not only tells them that we care about them, but it tells them that we're aware, that you're there, you're an individual. And so these are very important. That and I would like, as an advocate, a gender rights advocate, because most time when we speak, we say, oh, I'm only interested in women and children's rights. But the men rights are very important, and this is something that we need to discuss. We're hearing when we speak about rape and other incidences that affect women, there's a public outcry, there are marches, there are persons discussing those issues, and we want to embark on those. But when we hear about violence and gun violence that affect our males, we do not hear anything. We do not hear the solutions. We do not hear persons coming out and say we need to stop engaging in those activities. Because a young man doesn't wake up one morning and say, okay, I'm going to become a part of a gang. Nobody wakes up and dream of becoming, well, I'm hoping that nobody wakes up and assume. Every child that you speak with, when you speak with a child, they would tell you, oh, I aspire to be this. I want to be a fireman. I want to be a nurse. They aspire to be somebody.
But do you think that this might be changing because of what young people are being exposed to right now in their communities, and who are their role models?
Yes, so role model has a very important, mentoring has a very, very important role in our societies. And so we have to look at, I believe that most secondary school have mentoring programs implemented. I think a year ago, the ministry, or 2 years ago, the ministry implemented mentoring programs in some schools. So there is starts, there are solutions. And so those mentoring programs do work. The Big Brother, Big Sister programs do work, because at that stage, they're looking for guidance. They're looking for, because when we were growing up, nobody would tell us, okay, well, these are the ways that you can become a doctor. Or these are the ways, you know. So we need that in society. We need where the adults, the role models, can come in and give them that kind of guidance, give them that kind of support. Because yes, it's good to have support from home. You have your parents, you have your aunts, your parents, and everybody, the neighbors. But the average person, the person who works at the bank, or the lady at the market, she can give you guidance as well.
But do you think the state can play more of an interventionist role?
The state.
More of an interventionist role in terms of, for example, young men and women who are not getting the kind of guidance that would result in them having a fruitful and successful future.
Yes.
That will get the nurturing that is certainly not available in the household. I think it was just earlier today, Ronald Bohingson called NewsMakerLive and was saying that sometimes we are tone deaf. We do not realize that there's certain things in our society that are occurring.
Yes.
For example, you have children who are raising themselves, who do not have a mother, do not have a father, and so on. Maybe you just have an older sibling in the home. Yes. Should the state be intervening in such circumstances?
Yes, of course, and the state is mandated to do that. It is the state's responsibility to ensure, particularly minors and children and youth, it is their responsibility to enact and to ensure that the children, or those you've received those kinds of services. But what is very important is that though in many instances these services may be provided, a lot of those citizens are not aware. And so the public advocacy is important. The public has to know that these services are relatively available. Something else that is very important that you spoke about, that I've always had a problem with children being expelled from school or suspended from school at such tender ages. And I believe that right now the Minister of Education should look into that. Because primarily when you expel a child from school, what do you expect that child, 14, 15, just starting off life, and these are young persons, they're not aware of the long-term consequences. Their psychological development has not flourished into that sense. And we place them on the streets. And most of those kids, when you suspend them or expel them, where are they? They're at home. The parents perhaps may be at work. And so I believe that it's time that we find alternative ways of punishing or disciplining children.
What are those alternatives?
So in terms of students that you'd suspend or expel, they should have a facility where students can still go in and do their work.
Because the authorities are doing that out of frustration.
Yes.
After they have really tried and tried and tried, and whatever measures they have put in place, it's not resulting in the child being ameliorated and so on. So out of frustration, that's the only recourse that will be available to them,
it cannot
to
be,
the authorities.
For
and
children,
I'm trying to, I'm talking about the school in terms of the school
Yes.
system. So what should be done?
But I think it's we dismiss them too early. It's too early to already dismiss a child from education. I think education has the ability to change somebody's life. And if you're already dismissing a child at 14, 15, that child, chances are, like I said, the gangs are already, they're not concerned about how old you are. As long as you can hold a pistol, that's all they're interested in. As long as you can rob someone, that's what they're interested in. And so at that age, it's too early to dismiss children. And I think they're minors. So we have to look at it in terms of juvenile justice and what we can do. What are some of the alternatives for these young persons? If there is a particular school or particular facility that we can place them, because I believe in education. I believe that a child should go to school as long as he can or she can. So if you can go to school as old as 18, yes. So I should not be seeing you on the street at 14 years old between the hours of 9 to 3. There should be a facility that this child can continue his or her education. And so as a society, we have to, because if we look at the research and we look at the statistics, if we just decide we're going to do some research on what is happening at Borderley with all these young men, the majority of them may have had to either drop out from school, been suspended, or expelled from school. And so we have to look at that as well. When these young persons, what future do we have for them? They never completed the CXCs, they never completed school. What future? How can they actually become contributing citizens within society? And so as a society, yes, we want to blame young persons, but what is our responsibility? Have we provided the opportunities for them? Have we provided the equal opportunity? And yes, I understand that frustration will be there, but when we look at our role, our God-given role as parents, guidance, and mentors and leaders, this is what we ought to do. They're our children, and this is what we need to do for them.
You're watching NewsMaker Live. If you can respond to this question, I'll pose it to you. That is the illegal guns. Where are they coming from? Stay with us. We'll discuss that issue in just a moment. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching NewsMaker Live right here on DBS Television. My name is Timothy Polio. We conclude at 10 o'clock this evening. My guest is Felicia Brown, human rights advocate, lecturer at the University of the West Indies, and of course she contested the Castries Central seat in 2011 on an LPM ticket. Unfortunately, she did not win, but I'm sure that you certainly savor the experience.
Yes, of course.
The illegal guns, in your humble opinion, where do you think they're coming from? Because we are not manufacturing illegal guns in St. Lucia or in the Caribbean. They're coming from outside the region. How are they getting here?
Well, that's a very challenging question. One of the things that I think I remembered is the having more secure borders because it's coming in. It's not something that we create in here. So we have to find ways that we can curb the levels of illegal guns in our societies. But we tend to speak about only illegal guns. Having access to guns in itself, even legal and licensed firearm, it's something that we need to look at within our societies.
Why?
Because it's gun violence is gun violence.
No, because law-abiding citizens
yes.
who have a firearm, a licensed firearm,
yes.
they rarely find themselves in any opportunity or any occasion to use it.
Yes.
Okay, they seldom use the firearms,
yes.
so I don't see them as an issue.
If we're discussing guns and we're discussing gun policies, I think we have to take in consideration both legal and illegal guns.
Why look at?
Because it's important. Because we need to. If we have a situation.
But what is the problem? The problem are the illegal guns.
The problem are illegal guns.
Not the licensed firearms.
But we're discussing gun policies. So if we're discussing gun policies, what kinds of laws can we implement to curb the levels of guns violence that we have in our societies? So yes, I do understand that licensed firearms they do not create any kind of mayhem within the society. It's the legal ones that we need to focus. But guns are guns. What creates the violence is the individuals behind those behind those devices. And so when we look at a society as small as St. Lucia and we see the number of gun violence within a country, we have to take all facets into consideration. I believe sometime last week, you found a young man was charged for a high-powered firearm. And so where is it coming from? It's a very good question. Obviously, it's coming from outside to within. And so the government has to implement policies. And when I say policies, our borders have to be a lot more secure. But also, how do we get them off the streets?
But we continue to have our borders porous.
Yes, but how funding? We have to get the necessary funding for that. We have to, it will take us to a different space, but we have to establish better relations with our funders and donors, persons that will help us, like the U.S. and what has happened in the last few years. We have to look at that as well. We have to look
You're talking about impacts.
Yes. I didn't want to touch much on that, but we'll see how that goes. But all of that is important because if we do not get the funding and our police officers out there trying to secure our borders without the necessary equipment, without the necessary kinds of services, then we'll always have those kinds of problems. But what we also have to think about is how do we get those illegal guns from the hands of our youth? And that's why it becomes very complicated. We've had amnesty for guns as well. We've had various ways to try to get those guns off the streets, but it doesn't seem to be working. And so we have to...
You think that somebody is benefiting from this financially and therefore somehow they're well connected and maybe the authorities do not want to act? And those are maybes.
What is very important is that there are times that we speak and we do not have the necessary research towards that. We know that there is illegal guns on the streets. What kinds of research have we conducted? And I think that's the academic side of me coming. We've hardly do the research. The necessary research is important. We have to, as a society, not only whether it's the Minister of National Security, they have to go and do the necessary research on those issues. We have to know, do we have gangs in St. Lucia? Do we have research to tell us that there are actually gangs in St. Lucia? And if we do have gangs in St. Lucia, what types of gangs do we have? There are all types of gangs in the world. So if we have gangs, are they indigenous gangs? Are they international gangs? And so these are some of the concerns that we want to have as well. When we talk about borders and security, we want to also discuss in terms of immigration and immigration laws. We would also want to talk about human trafficking. So we want to look at in terms of what the connections are, because at most times when we have those people that trafficking, they're not only trafficking human persons, they're trafficking cargoes, they're trafficking devices, and so the trafficking of drugs. And so these are issues that we need to take at the forefront and deal with those issues. We cannot be curtailing around it all the time. Yes, we know that there are guns, there are illegal guns on the street, but what is the research? We need the research. We need the research so that we can enact, so that we can develop policies that will enable us. We can't, it would be a dream to get all of those guns out of the streets because of what is happening right now. But at the same time, we have to do the necessary work. That would be in terms of the research.
But do you think, considering that gun violence is something that is rife in the Caribbean, not only St. Lucia, it's affecting a number of islands.
Yes.
We have the University of the West Indies. You were once a lecturer at the University of the West Indies. Do you think that is a challenge that the UE can take up in terms of conducting the research and the studies?
Yes, of course. And they have been doing those research and studies. It is for our individual governments and individual societies to have access to, and the information is always there. The research is always there. We have students, we have lecturers all the time that conduct those types of research. But once we do the research, what is very important is how do we transmit that data, that information that we receive into a policy development. And so this is not that the information is somewhere abstract and we can't find it, it is there. And if it's not, then we can allow or provide the kinds of support to provide that information, because we cannot just have policies, ad hoc policies. Every time we hear a crime happening, okay, we're going to put this law in. Oh, okay, we're going to enact this law. Oh, we're going to put this in policy. It has to be something that is done holistically, and we have to take all the facets into consideration as well. And so when we look at in terms of international border security, and that is something that affects us. We may not see the direct effects on tourism, but it does. And so greater countries, and when we say greater countries, when we're looking at international organizations and countries that have the kinds of funding to secure their borders, we have to see how we can secure our own borders as small countries as well.
What is preventing our AGs, who normally meet, ministers of national security, our prime ministers, from meeting on crime and coming up with those ideas that you have just itemized there?
I think the ideas are there, but it's what we choose to discuss. I believe at this stage we're seeing, and I don't want to say it in a very discriminatory way, but most of the young men that are dying are victims of crime are from a different demographic. You know, they probably persons from young, poorer communities, and so it seemed to have an interest, but it's not as, okay, we need to do this immediately. And so we as a society need to look at that all citizens are equal, and we cannot ever allow that to elude us, that we have to understand that every citizen's life is important. The life of the ordinary citizen is just as important as a priest, a prime minister. It is just as important. And so the protection of those lives and ensuring that all persons should not be living in the fear of violence. And if we know that that access to illegal guns is something that is creating that problem, we need to do it urgently.
You think the situation would have been different in terms of the reaction from the authorities if, for example, there's the children, sons and daughters of prominent people in our Caribbean societies that were being gunned down and being directly impacted by crime?
And that's where we speak about the hegemony within societies. Yes, we want a society to be just, but there are different forms of injustice. And so I would tend to want to agree with you at this stage, because you see that if the crime was happening, that level of crimes was happening in different parts of our society, in the parts where we consider as more affluent, would the response be the same? Would we have a lot more in terms of interventions? And so that's very important, because in our society, yes, we hear about the gun violence, but it's only saturated in certain communities. And God forbid it expands. And so when it does happen, we want persons to realize that crime can happen anywhere. And it can happen to anyone. We were already having drive-by shootings. And as a small society, as my country, I would love to think that would become more reflective of those situations and not believe that, oh, I live in a certain community, so it doesn't affect me too much, because I can still drive around and my children are still safe. But you know, what crime does, it grows like a cancer, until it gets to the point where we can't control it anymore. The
approach might seem discriminatory, but do you think that it's inadvertently ignored? The whole problem is being ignored because the crime problem has really dogged the St. Lucia over the last, let's say, decade and a half or so. Yes. So I do not think that we can say that any government is deliberately ignoring the problem. Is it a case where, for example, they are bereft of ideas? They do not have the ideas and the know-how in tackling the problems?
But the government is not one or two individuals. There are technical persons as well. They're academics. Our role is there to support them. There are civil societies. And I want to discuss the role of civil societies.
Do we have a weak civil society or non-existent?
I believe the civil societies need to begin to advocate and need to do the types of work that is necessary.
But in the first place, do we have an active civil society in St. Lucia?
We need, I don't even believe that there is a head body of civil societies, and that's something that they can do as well. Because what you're saying is that there are individual civil societies that work on individual projects. They get individuals funding, and they identify different areas that they need to work with. But they need to have a more holistic approach to that, more collaborative approach. And like I said before, gun violence is something that we need to discuss because it affects all of those civic societies, and we need to look at that and how does it, what can we do? Should we start discussing it within our school environment? Should we discuss it in the church? And should we place a lot more emphasis, or should we discuss to the our policymakers on how we can deter that kind of violence within our environment, within our country?
Do you think leadership, therefore, is at the heart of the problem? Broadly speaking.
Leadership, and we're not saying just political leadership, but we're thinking leadership in a sense that we need to start looking at the social impacts on those kinds of social ills. What are some of those social ills does have an economic impact as well. Through research, you will see that. So yes, our leadership, we need to recognize that our youth plays a very important part of our community and our state. And so whatever affects our youth will affect us as a people in the next 5-10 years. And so we need to start discussing those issues. We need to bring those youth councils on our boards, various boards, to discuss what are the issues that are affecting them. Because when we look at crime and what we're doing right now, we're actually looking at the consequences of crime, the end result. But it begins somewhere, it starts somewhere. And so we need to find what we always see, the root cause of those problems, and see how we can deter them from happening to what we have now.
How do we uplift those depressed communities? Communities that refer to as ghettos. There's a word called gentrification.
Yeah.
You know, when you uplift those communities,
yes,
and you give that community a new life, and the property of those people would increase in
yes,
value and so on. How do we do that in those communities?
Yes, there's a term called social architecture. And what it does is to look at those communities and do things to enhance that community. I believe that what started at Grass Street, having the Derek Walcott Museum, is a start. When you go there, you see for yourself what it actually does. What Grass Street used to be to what it is now. You want persons to believe that they're part of something, that we did not just forget about them. And every citizen, I keep saying that, every citizen is important, regardless of what community you're from. And I try to restrain from the word ghetto because it comes with all these negative connotations. But every community has a history. Grass Street wasn't always Grass Street that way. I mean, I grew up in Graveyard. Those communities was not always that way. It has a history. And it's very important that I went to a lecture by Travis Weeks, and he was talking about our history, our heritage, and where did we come from as a people? You know, that different, and I think that's one of the ways that we can discuss with our youth, because most of the young persons do not know. They know Grass Street for what it is now, or the other communities. But if we can teach them about the heritage and make them feel that they belong to somebody, they belong to a group of persons that do care, and we have a long history, even as far as African people, we have a history. We have a placement in this world, and these are some of the ways that we can start discussing. When you make a person, a young man, feel that he's a man, a noble man, as opposed to just looking at them, okay, well, you know, he's a criminal. The way that he responds and reacts to is very important. You see a young man, you just call him a gassa or something, or as opposed to saying sir. When you call a young man sir, it gives him a different, you know, connotation as to who he is. What is his placement within the community? So we can start by providing that kind of what you call human development, that personal development, and make persons feel that, hey, I'm a citizen. I am a contributor to the development of my country. And it can happen in various ways, through education, because most of these young persons, if you provide them with the opportunity, whether it's educational opportunity, some of them may not be in terms of wanting to become an engineer, but he might want to be an electrician, a plumber. Those vocational skills are very important as well. And so we have to find, we can't just dismiss them.
But how can these people demand more and gain more from governments, from the authorities? Because you made a point earlier on that if we had an increase in criminal activity occurring in certain parts of the island, then I'm sure that we'll be having a direct response from the authorities in terms of tackling it and so on. Now, I think this would be the result of the prominent people in those communities raising their voices and they being listened to because of their influence. Is it a situation where people in those so-called depressed communities, as much as they speak, as much as they holler, the authorities are not paying attention and not listening?
They listen during election period.
Yeah.
They listen when so it's the time that we need to advocate. And I think that's persons realize, they need to realize that it is your future. If you place those persons as individuals as your representative, then they ought to listen. They ought to. It's mandated that you have a situation that, you know, your voice is very important. That one individual voice is very important. So when we look at persons like Derek Walcott and where he grew up and where he raised, just one voice. And so we need to look at every individual of having that power with that voice. And so, yes, you may be a young man that is unemployed and you may have a criminal record, because most young men do have a criminal record for various reasons. And persons may not want to listen to you. But you do not stop there. You do not stop. You continue. Somebody will listen. The press. You can go to your church leaders, the various, but somebody will listen. You cannot just give up. And I think that's, we as a society, I think, we speak about having that 100% Lucianness, and we're Lucians and we're St. Lucians. But what is different about us as a people is that we were always a people that stood up. We're known for that in the Caribbean. We stood up for our rights and we speak up for our issues. And so now we cannot feel that because our generation has changed and our culture, not really our culture, but we've had different paradigm shifts in terms of politics, that we must forget ourselves as a people. Our voice is very important. We're very good when it comes to articulate. If you can't speak it in English, parle Creole. Amon kai kuteu. And so it is as a people that we need to boost up their self-esteem as well. It's very important that we have to teach that. It's very, when we see what is happening with our young men and you see them, they want to be looked up to. They want to feel that they have a role to play. They want to be part of the society, and don't just dismiss them. And that's what it is.
You're watching NewsMaker Live. With you for a break. When we come back, we'll be taking your calls once again for my guest, Ms. Felicia Brown, human rights advocate and former lecturer at the University of the West Indies. Please stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. Once again, you're watching NewsMaker Live on DBS Television. We'll put the telephone number on screen so that you can call with your questions and comments for my guest. She is Miss Felicia Brown, human rights advocate and lecturer at the University of the West Indies, and also contested the Cashview Central seat in 2011. We already have our first caller line. Good evening. Go ahead with your contribution, caller.
Tim, good evening.
Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening, Ms. Brown.
Good evening.
Because I never even knew that. I used to see you, admired you, and never even realized that you were from my neck of the woods.
Yes.
Tim, there's a question I always wanted to ask you. And that question is really perpetuated tonight by Ms. Brown's insistence that we should also look at legal firearms. The question is a rhetorical one, but, how do you know with absolute certainty that most of the crime, or not most of the crime, but all of the crime committed here is being, the gun crime I'm referring to, is being done by illegal firearms?
Well, based on what we're hearing from the police, based on also what we're hearing from some of what we're hearing from the instructors, Those people are teaching people to use the firearms and so on, so-called law-abiding citizens. What we are hearing that in the main, those law-abiding citizens do not even get to use their firearm.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
You still on?
Yeah. Well, but yeah, that's what you're hearing. I mean, but I'm saying that, look, that in itself is not even evidence. I think one should go by. You know, I mean, I'm saying this because I'm not aware that there is any sort of. We don't have a ballistics expert here, where there is consistent testing of the bullets or the ammunition to link it to a firearm and so on. You know, and I'm aware that there is quite a bit. There's a lot of illegal firearms. Sorry, legal firearms. There are a lot of legal firearm holders there, and there have been instances I am aware of that murders have been committed by legal firearms. You know, I just thought I should ask that. The second question I wanted to ask you, another thing I'm always hearing, and coming from the police, that we have porous
borders,
as if to suggest that all the illegal firearms coming in here are coming through these porous borders, and I'm referring to, non-ports of entries and so on are being smuggled in and so on. You know, how do we know that? I am not aware that customs or we have this sort of equipment at our borders, etc. That is, or we are sufficiently equipped, for example, to detect somebody concealing a weapon, you know, in some sort of ingenious sort of means and sort of creative means. You know, I am not sure whether.
Yeah, but the fact is, Caller, they are entering our shores, and we do not manufacture firearms.
I understand that. I'm just saying, just put your finger on that. They are entering our shores with absolute certainty that most of it are entering our shores because we have porous borders and they are being smuggled in through some sort of non-port of entry, etc. You know, when we're looking at all of these situations, we have to put all possibilities on the table. And then we have to start with basically the equipment or the resources that are available to us, the resources that we have exclusive control of, right? We look at the Customs and Excise Department. Are they sufficiently equipped? You understand? Something as critical as a scanner to detect firearms when it's coming in. I'm not even aware that Customs and Excise Department has one. You understand? So, you know, I mean, we tend to dismiss it. Porous borders, all are being committed by illegal firearms without, you know, the empirical evidence to suggest or to conclude of this with this statement.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim.
What's it, ma'am?
Yes, I think that's these are very valid points that he's drawn out in terms of our customs and excise and immigration. How do we detect those kinds of devices, and what do we have? Is there the funding for those kinds of areas? We did hear as Prime Minister spoke in terms of securing and further securing our borders and enhancing our border controls, but when and how soon are those kinds of policies will be implemented? It's very important. And so as citizens, these are very valid concerns that we should have.
Because very often we hear that the authorities, the governments do not have the resources to provide, let's say, the police with the tools that they need, Customs Department and so on.
Yes, but the resource, and this is where it becomes a very problematic situation where if they do not have the resources, and what we tend to do is to blame, most of the time we blame the police. The police is not there doing their job, or they're not, but if they do not have the resources, it's very important. Yes.
Good evening. Go ahead with your contribution, caller.
Good evening, Tim.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
Okay, good evening, Ms. Brown.
Good evening.
Okay. Ms. Brown?
Yes, sir.
You said many years ago there wasn't drive-by shootings, eh?
I was making note of when I was growing up.
Yeah, there wasn't KFC neither.
Yeah, I know.
And now come with KFC, come with lifestyle disease, eh?
Yes.
And also come with development, come with the vagaries of development.
Yes.
Which are what we're facing today, all the crime.
Yes.
Now, we talk about crime, and I think that's at the heart of what Boo was trying to tell you today, you know, Tim. We could probably make interventions that could keep the lid on it to a certain extent. But I think at the heart of it is fundamentally, perhaps, is our education system plays plays a big role, Tim. And I'll explain, because, Tim, I always like to give you life stories.
Yeah.
Right. There's a gentleman I know him very, very well. He's from, Shozer. He can't read, he can't write, he could hardly speak English. He came to Castries many years ago. All he could use is the cutlass and the implements of farming. But he had to come to town because his parents didn't have sufficient land to make farming a viable prospect. So he came to town. Today, and he pursued the things he could do with his hand, used the cutlass. Eventually, he got a weed eater. Today, this gentleman has his own house. He's working for himself. He's self-sufficient, Tim. On the other hand, you have children, some of them middle class, who have been going to secondary school, some of them A-level, and they're sitting on the block, Tim.
Yeah.
The expectations we build from education is not being delivered. And, Tim, that is a big problem, Tim. And these youngsters cannot cope with that because they're not going to push cutlass, they're not going to mix cement, they're not going to pick up garbage. Tim, sometimes you wonder if it's not a blessing that some people don't learn in our education system, Because Paro had a song from way back. If he was if he had learned at school in the time when they were teaching him, Dan is the man in the van. Right now, we'd have been a damn fool if he had learned well. This continues, Tim, because what if some people don't learn well? Maybe some people who didn't learn well are making a living. They work as sanitary workers because they have no GCs.
Yeah.
The older people always tell you, travail pas ni honte. There's no shame in work.
Yes.
But we build a cadre, a generations of children that's not going to do these things, Tim. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
The expectation's too high. Now, I'll give you another story. Along a road, I saw this young lady walking in front of me. There are blocks every little path you pass. On the blocks, fellas, stop her. Hey, my darling, she stopped, she talk. Pass another block, she stopped, she talk. Lower down, Tim. A fella mixing cement. Can't stop her. Boy, if you see the look she give the fella, she's screwing the fella. And I'm observing that, and I saying the fellas are just there idling, doing nothing, attracts her attention more than a man who is genuinely working for, for his living. So you see, we have these kind of problems to face, Tim. You understand?
It's a kind of mindset that we have to get out of. But it certainly will take a lot of work.
We keep hearing that education is the cure to poverty, but we're not examining the kind of education, Tim. We must begin to focus on the kind of education that could create productivity and could we don't teach our children how to climb trees. We don't teach our children how to swim. We don't teach our children how to fish, and these sort of things.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So we have to look at these things, Tim, and until such time we sit down and examine our education system seriously, Tim, we will not, and at what point do we decide, Tim?
But do you agree that there are some people are more creative than others who have a knack to survive? For example, if they're laid off from the hotel, they move on to something. Either it's catering, they just move on to hairdressing or something. Otherwise, in other cases, you have people who just hell-bent on wanting to...
About building character, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, he said that there are a lot of people who come out from the lower, poorer quarters, and they're doing well because they build character. We must, we must teach humility in school.
Yeah.
We must teach love and these kind of things. These people think you can't teach them things. You could only teach
the academics,
English and chemistry and things. You know, we must build character.
Okay, Suku, thanks a lot.
Right.
What's it as an educator? What say you to this?
I believe that education has its spirit. Civic responsibility is very important as well. Showing young persons and teaching them young persons of being part of the society. You have to teach those things. Those types of socialization skills. You teach those things in schools. And so his point is very valid.
We have another call. Good evening. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Good evening to you, ma'am.
Okay, what I'd like to say is that a lot of the children nowadays, we have to blame us parents. Yeah, we need to make a living. We work in a hotel. We work in the tourism industry. We come back home for 12. In the night, we have no babysitters. The children babysitting themselves, practically, right? I mean, they should put in place where parents, persons who get other jobs, everybody, I would say, to my belief, 85% of solutions work in the tourism industry, especially in the hotel sector. And you get persons not having time to take care of their kids. You understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
So you do not know where your child is. You don't have a choice. You need to make a living for your family. I mean, if they should be make something else for the number one industry in St. Lucia. You understand? And another thing is, you spoke about expelling of kids, which I disagree with from day one, even my time of going to school. You cannot expel children. Children do things deliberately just to be expelled so they could stay home and they could go on the block and they could go online. There should be other punishments. When it comes to schooling, they should have a harder punishment. You understand? You should send them to the principal office, give them extra work to do, extra assignments to do. You understand? Stuff like that. Don't send them home. Like Miss Brown said earlier on, parents need to work. So if you expel the child and the parent needs to go to work, who is going to stay home and watch that child? You understand?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I really think they need to put extra,
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your contribution. I think it's a case where you don't want to blame the educators because they don't have much room to maneuver in terms of the alternatives, right? So instead of keeping that child in the school, and that child is, for lack of a better word, a menace, to the teachers, to other classmates, and so on. What is the alternative? And that's where maybe the Ministry of Education and the other agencies should come
civil
in.
societies to provide that support.
We have a call.
Hello,
Good evening.
my soul.
Hello.
Yes, hello, good night.
Good evening to you, sir. You're on the air.
You and your guest.
Good evening.
Good evening.
But I listened to Ms. Brown talking about the whole idea that children should not be expelled from school. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
And someone called that he should be given more work, like to read more books and whatever. But in the case where in Viewford last, it happened where the student used a cutlass.
Attacked the principal.
Attacked Dr. Morla Joseph with the cutlass. And would you advise that this child be at the school?
No.
And give that child, give this child more books to read?
No.
Would you advise? This child should, let me tell you something. Let us be ourselves and be true to ourselves and others. This youth should be out of the school. Out of the school, crisis, boy children center or wherever. But you cannot allow someone to be at the school, being so radical at the school. No. Good night.
All right, thanks a lot. But that's a rare incident, eh? That's an isolated
and it does happen,
incident.
but what do you do? Are we going to criminalize the child? He's still a minor, he's still a child. So what do you do? So we have to find ways, put him in some kind of institution or facility where he can learn. He can continue his education. So dismissing, I have a serious issue with dismissing young persons at such an early age. We're criminalizing our children. And remember that their own psychological development have not formed as yet. And so we have to take those things into consideration. Their moral responsibility is still very screwed at that time.
We have a call. Hello, good evening.
Jim.
Hi, good evening to you, sir. How are you?
I'm pretty good.
It's not very often you call Newsmaker.
I know, I was about to say that. Jim, a very interesting program, a nice point of view expressed. Hello to your guest. I've spoken to her a few times too. What percentage of St. Lucians you think are involved in the shootings and the knifings? And what percentage you think?
Very small. 2%, 3%.
An almost insignificant number.
Very.
Okay? So, how can we start blaming schools or lack of education or not reading enough books or all kind of that? We have another problem, and we have to look at what the possibilities are. We don't have a police force. We don't have, we're not living in modern times. Much of the morality that we preach, hard to say, the old-fashioned morality that almost has no place in any part of the world, Tim. Things have changed. The hemlines have gone up, okay? It is pointless trying to make young people think like old people. They're in a modern world, and we're busy wrestling them, telling them what to do to climb trees and go and fish. The point is, young people today don't want to climb trees and don't want to climb fish. They happen to live on an island. That's the way it is. But they need the skills that will allow them the freedom to go somewhere and make a proper living for themselves. Yes. Or the schools teach them things that they can do themselves on the internet and earn a living.
But Rick, not all the children can operate at that level. Not all the children are looking forward to migrating.
Talking of all the children, Tim. I'm saying the system. First of all, we're talking as if every young kid in St. Lucia is carrying a gun and a knife. No. And that is obviously not true. No. Okay? We have a police force that is demoralized, that is broken. We have a broken justice system that has been broken for a long, long time. We have a bunch of sham institutions and family courts, all of them undermanned, underfunded, etc. There are no heroes in the country. Even if there is somebody who sounds like he might be an exemplar or a hero, politicians are quick to bring him down and make him look like the worst thing in the world. And it goes across for both sides, by the way, etc. So we are reaping a lot of sowing what we sowed a long time, and it's taken a while. I remember, Tim, I've been doing journalism for a while here. I remember one time when the police were just shooting rastas for the sake of being rastas, the Mon Jimmy shooting and all that kind of stuff. A lot of horrors have happened here, and we're blessed by the society. And we are reaping what we sowed when we are not equipped at all to reap. We are blessed, all kinds of rapes and everything, depending on who it is. We brought this on us, and we better stop playing games about it's the schools or it's the parents. Like home, housing, for example. Housing is about the worst thing you have, Tim. That is where you create the monsters, in lousy housing, where you have little brothers and sisters playing with each other because they saw this and saw that, and their heads are messed up. And people have not stopped to think about the consequences. I'm sure your guest will back me up on that. The consequences of incest, the consequences of rape, and all those things. Those things are crimes in themselves, but they create 3 and 4 more crimes as a result. I can't keep you on my.
All right, thanks a lot. But I think as much as what Rick is saying is valid, what we've been doing this evening is looking for solutions to those problems, the way forward. Yeah. And it's true, we have it in the society, but we also have to tackle it from various perspectives in the school and so on.
And the dialogue is important. Yeah. We need to discuss those issues, yes.
Good evening. NewsMakerLive, you're on the air.
Good evening, Jim.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
Tim, I don't think the crime problem in St. Lucia is because of education. I think the problem is because, education might have a part to play with it, but then again, the ability to educate yourself. And if you look at the communities and the persons who are creating these crimes, most often come from very, very hard lives. And then you have a situation in St. Lucia where our unemployment is so high among the youth, right? And then you look at our financial social assistance for young people, okay? We're paying 12.5% VAT, it was 15 before. But then what assistance goes out to our young people who is in need? Because what you have is you have persons depending on middle-income families, and then that then brings middle-income families below their level now. So you have a situation that's been created even more than it's supposed to. So in that case, I think the government should organize, because you look at all the teenage pregnancies and the young people, they need housing, they need food, they need clothing. Now, not saying, I heard the minister, Ubaldo, said that the previous administration was creating a welfare St. Lucia. But that's not the case. I mean, it has nothing to do with politics, but I'm just saying everyone needs assistance. And like you can see, sometimes people need assistance for healthcare. They have to be begging. They need assistance to send their children to school. You have other people donating bags, shoes, whatever it is. What if there was something like a basic assistance program for persons who are unemployed, right? If you look at, if you know of the situation in Canada, they have a similar program and it works perfectly well. Now, I might not compare St. Lucia to Canada, but then again, I think it can be done because we're paying as much as taxes as they do, maybe even more, right? And then when you have ministers saying...
No, but they have a much larger tax base, a larger tax population, right? Well, I mean, the people who are paying taxes in St. Lucia have a very small number of people.
But you have to remember it's per capita. You have to remember it's per capita.
And don't forget about the unemployment.
People in Canada.
Yeah, but don't forget the unemployment problem that you made reference to. If you are unemployed, you don't pay taxes. You understand?
Well, I agree, but then again,
you can't.
To create if the more money circulating in the economy generates more economy, more employment, more money generate more money circulating. So, mind you, people don't want to depend on the government. That's not what it is. Although some people might take the advantage and do it, you will always get that. But then again, which one is better, right? You have a society where we look after each other, or a society where we don't care and then things just go however it wants. Then you have, when you look at the situation with ministers and politicians, I mean, the people are losing faith in them because they, on the other hand, creating so much problem with financial, well, let's not call it fraud, but
mismanagement
of funds and whatever, but yet still there's never enough money for any other program in terms of the young people. So, I mean, where does that fit in? So the young people look at it like, these guys do it, they don't get penalized for it. So, and we might think that's random talking, but they do think like that. Okay?
All right, sir.
They really do think like that.
Thank you so much, and we appreciate your contribution. That's a final call. Final comments from you, ma'am.
We have to, again, take in consideration the aspect of human rights and ensuring that persons do know their rights and ability to assert those rights as well. And so our young persons, we want to appeal to them that they need to continue providing the positive attributes and providing the positive elements of their being to society and be part of society. And don't feel exclusive or excluded from society. We're part of society and contribute. You may feel that you cannot contribute in any way, but every little contribution towards our development of our country is paramount. And do not give up hope. If you see persons like me would be considered grew up in a impoverished community, there is hope. There is hope. You just have to continuously believe in yourself. And in terms of the gun violence, we're appealing to our society members that ease out on, the violence. We have children, you have children, most of those persons have children as well. And think about how does it affect them? How does it affect them when chances are you're no longer in their lives? Think about it and think about the consequences. Too often we just react in the situation. We get hot-headed and, we want to do this and do that, but go me pas tout. Tout ba c'est l'amour à présent. Nous ne pouvons pas chiller ça. C'est la vie. Nous ne pouvons pas chiller la vie tout le monde. And that would be my final thought.
Merci tout bon.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being my guest on this evening's Newsmaker Live. And thank you so much for watching and contributing via your calls. If it is Wednesday, it's Newsmaker Live. And I'm being told by my producer that we'll be having our clip that peaked in just a moment. You'll find it very entertaining. After having those discussions that are so serious and that certainly would sometimes take a toll on us because of the nature of what we're discussing, we need to laugh. Stand by now for the clip that peaked. Once again, that's the broadcaster. It's a very good evening. My name is Timothy Paulion saying good night and see you next time.